Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 403rd New Social Environment. I am Nick Bennett, the Special Projects Editor here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Jonathan Lasker and Choghakate Kazarian. We're thrilled to welcome Jessica Grim and Melanie Neilson for a co-reading of a collaborative work published in the poetry section of our October issue, which just went live this week. We'd like to start by thanking the Dermot Company for supporting this month of the New Social Environment. And as the Rail is celebrating its 21st anniversary this October, you can learn more about them and the Rail's curatorial projects through some links we'll post in the chat in just a moment. And we have started all of our events with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. The heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation, as said by the great Angela Davis. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions we'll be posting in just a moment. But for now, to introduce today's guest and host, since the 1980s, artist Jonathan Lasker has transformed a visual language inherited from modernism into a syntax all his own, making paintings that exert both analytical rigor and an undeniably visceral appeal. Born yesterday, his first solo exhibition with Greene Naftali spans 4 decades from Lasker's early career to the present, occasioning new interpretations of his singular brand of abstraction and its lasting impact on generations of artists. The exhibition is on view through October 23rd. Our host today, curator and art historian Choghakate Kazarian, was formerly a curator at the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris and taught at the École du Louvre. She has curated exhibitions on Lucio Fontana, Piero Manzoni, Carol Apple, Henry Darger, and group exhibitions, including Jonathan Lasker. She is editor-at-large here at the Brooklyn Rail and is a PhD candidate at the Courtauld Institute of Art. She is currently a Terra Foundation Fellow at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So without further ado, Choghakate, take it away.
Thank you, Nick, for this introduction, and very happy to be here today to talk about this amazing exhibition. I will start showing you a few images of this show that is on view until October 23rd. Here we go, which is an exhibition centered on Jonathan Lasker's signature style, the scribble. And it's an amazing opportunity to see the magnitude of your work with this show that displays recent works from 2000 until now, but also some older works from the 1980s. The scribble is an amazing sign or gesture in your work because it's like the empty doodling we can do when we speak on the phone, but it's also the most intimate mark of the hand. And in this painting, you proceed to sort of collage with layers of paintings and patterns, as we can see in this detail of the work Annual Identity, which we'll talk about later. And this is probably one of my favorite paintings of the exhibition, where we can see how you use the scribble contained in a little island of impasto, and you just reshuffle these little islands as a collage in your works. I would like to start the discussion with this painting called Born Yesterday, because the exhibition, it gives its title to the exhibition, and it's quite funny because a few days ago, I was talking about you to the sculptor Joel Shapiro, and when I mentioned your age to him, he was very surprised. He said, "Oh, really? I thought he was much younger, something like 50 years old." And it was quite funny because that's also what I thought for a long time, also that you were 50. So the title of this exhibition is very appropriate, I think, in that spirit. And it's very exciting because we can see also your work from the 80s, which is so the decade you kind of identified with. So I would like to invite you to speak about this work and why you decided to center the exhibition around this specific work and how it all started.
Well, this particular painting, actually, there's another image that I probably should have offered to be put in the sort of slide review, as it were, and that's a painting called Look-alike. And the composition of this painting in the background, namely the three triangles forming almost like an endless highway coming to a vanishing point, that was in that painting Look-alike, but that painting had a very different treatment. That was painted pure impasto, not scribbly lines, and it had the outer boundaries were sort of a light sap green, sort of a pastel green, and then I can't remember what was in the inner triangles, but I think it was just one color in each of the triangles, and that sort of claw-like form wasn't in it. And what happened was in 1989, I was trying to reach for another motif for the backgrounds of my paintings. And I thought about that painting, which I thought was a very successful painting. And then I decided to renew it and come up and imbue it with the scribble motif. Which is something that really has always interested me as it comes from surrealism and has to do with direct association with the subconscious. When you're automatically drawing, in surrealism, they talked about automatic writing and also automatic drawing, like somebody like André Masson, who I think is a very neglected artist. And he would do automatic drawing that were almost pure scribble, and it sort of became subconscious or unconscious, but conscious at the same time. So whenever you're making a mark and you're trying to make a picture, you are conscious, however unconscious or subconscious you wish to be. So anyway, that particular language really interested me a lot. And I decided to make this painting based on that previous composition and rework it in this manner. And so what I did, this particular painting, not all the other paintings, I mean, the painting American Obscurity from 1987 was also done 100% in my hand, but this one was also definitely done 100% in my hand. And I drew out the scribbles. I mean, the nature of the technique of these paintings, because I think it's kind of interesting to talk about this, because the paintings have long mystified people. It was sort of like you have a very rapid mark, like the scribble, obviously very quickly executed, and then it's very cleanly rendered. And people have often wondered, how does he do this? Does he have some kind of special marker? Is it a magic marker? What is it? And what it is it's my hand. Drawing is 100% mine, but the execution in paint is not. It's usually an assistant who takes a number 2 brush and very carefully traces out those lines, which I've drawn. So it's both an original and a copy at once. And but in the early days, when I first started doing it, the earliest one was American Obscurity, which you'll see a little later. And then eventually, well, actually the first one I ever did was a painting called The Sublimation of Love in 1985. And even before that, in 1978, Five of Spades had some scribbling in it, but it was not the same kind of execution. But in this painting, what I did was I drew out with a China marker on an already dried yellow surface. I drew out the red scribbly marks. And then afterwards, I traced out those lines with a number 2 brush, which now would be the work of an assistant. And the result is that if you look at the execution in this painting, you really get up close, you can see it has a lot more vibrato in the hand touch, a lot more. I allowed myself a lot more authorial touch elements in this painting, and which later kind of sort of reduces in the later works, and they become much cleaner and much more separate from the original mark. So anyway, that's where this painting came from. And then after that dried, I did the black triangle with a kind of claw reaching over the central triangle. And then when all of that dried, I palette knifed on the blue rectangle and drew a freehand, also freehand drawing in that rectangle, which then is 100% my own hand. But this was, but both the background and the foreground, this painting was all me.
I think it's interesting they speak of a subconscious, unconscious, and freehand drawing, because that's how you start. You start doing a freehand drawing, then you transpose this drawing into a small oil sketch, and then you scale it up into the final canvas. And it's kind of interesting for me because it's like you imitate your own spontaneity. You give birth to it, and then you just kill it by delegating and deferring your gesture, either to yourself, but in the process of transposing to imitating it, the same gesture, or just delegating it to your assistant, Kevin Boyko, which is also something I find very interesting, your relationship to the assistant's work, because it's not like your secret body double, because you just speak about it openly, but it's not a systematic process as Sol LeWitt and his assistant. So it could be you or it could be him. And can you speak more about this deferral of gesture and how you kind of, yes, you just play with your own spontaneity?
Right. Yeah, well, you know, it's probably the biggest bugaboo in art is the work of the assistant. Because
it's a big subject, yeah.
Yeah, because the authorial presence of the artist in the painting is very important, and it's because painting is very much about the hand. So much of the economy of art, if I dare so speak, is also based on the original mark of the artist. But this is 100% my hand, and it's 100% my drawing. But it's not 100% my painting. I mean, Kevin goes in there. Not in this one, and there's been other assistants all along the way, many of whom have had have had success since then, but it also actually what I found when I started to do it that way. I mean, at a certain point, I looked at this. I mean, this painting, when I traced out those lines myself, somehow or other, I had in my head that I had to do it all in one go in each triangle. And of course that was crazy. And so I wound up doing like 2 or 3 30-hour days over a couple of weeks to complete the scribbles. But I did know after doing this painting that if I was to continue like that, I would only be able to do about 3 or 4 paintings in a year. So naturally, I thought that there should be another way. And I came upon the idea of assistant work, but then I also kind of rejected it. But then once I got into having somebody else do this, I realized that there was something else involved that really was good. Namely, there was this duality. There was the really rapid mark that I made, and then it slowed down, this really slow tracing out and executing of that line. And it became my hand once removed, which is a whole other subject matter. It's like the disassociation of us from our own hand, which is happening in our society a lot. I mean, there's very little handwork any longer. We're not in touch with things tactily any longer. So it opened up new subjects, and I found it really interesting.
And I like this idea that somehow you just slow down in the process of scaling up. And also what is very fascinating with your works is how clean and perfect they are. There's no space for mistake. Everything is very much in control. Everything is so clean, as is your studio, as we can see on your background. But
we tried to mess it up. I'm sorry. We couldn't do it. We just couldn't make it.
There's extreme control in your work, but no restraint. I mean, the surface of your works are also very luscious, very almost erotic, as we can see in this wonderful detail, especially in these impasto zones where we have this feeling of sliding into the paint, the oiliness, the creaminess. And it's very interesting to think that your work has been associated with the pattern and decoration movement, but there's a lot of creaminess of the oil painting. You use oil painting and not acrylic or other synthetic materials. So there's something very buttery and erotic in your work, and especially in this wonderful painting that has been the cover of the exhibition catalog in this amazing color pink, bubblegum pink, sticking to the canvas. And I'm quite fascinated by this use of color pink, which comes a lot in your work and from the 80s until now. Pink is a complex color in art history. It has been usually associated with kind of bad taste, different kind of bad taste. It's either the sexual bad taste that we have in 18th century French painting like Boucher or Fragonard, or it's the commercial bad taste that we have in Wayne Thiebaud and the food industry that uses this kind of artificial pink. Or Lucio Fontana also loved this industrial pink. And someone once told me that for him, this shocking pink was associated to the what he called the rosa mutande di donne, which means the women's underwear. I don't know if this is true, that women's underwear were pink in the 60s, but that's the color he had in mind. And there are other interesting things, I think, about your colors. Maybe you want to say something about this use of pink?
Well, for me, it's really just another color. I mean, I do like pastel colors, and but it's really more the way the color works in tandem with other colors in the painting that's important for me. And I find with pastel colors, there's a certain light that's present. They come forward in a way, so quite often the figure elements might be pink, and also pink might suggest perhaps a human form, perhaps. But it's really how it works in tandem with other colors that's most of interest to me.
I would like to show another image. Let me see. Yes, this is a picture I took when I visited your studio. I was very fascinated by these tubes that you made yourself, and especially with the names of the colors. So here we have cappuccino mist, strong coffee. Since it was my first visit to your studio, I was too shy to open the tubes, but I believe the colors inside correspond to what we can imagine, according to, I guess, cappuccino mist is a sort of light brown mocha color, and strong coffee is a dark brown, and
it's just darker. It's the same color, really. It's just it has less white in it. And those are different steps in mixing cappuccino mist, which eventually got used in the painting. See, when I do these paintings, well, because Kevin often does a lot of the mixing, but when we put the colors together, we need a lot of it, because when I trowel that on the surface, it eats up a lot of paint. So if I run short and I have like a bar shape that is only half done and I have to mix it up again, I have to scrap that whole element. So I always mix too much, and therefore, you know, there are a lot of these tubes around.
Yeah, as this one also, I love the olive oil. At first I thought, oh, obviously.
Right, and the oil, that's olive oil. What was it? Popeye's olive oil.
So it's more a cartoonesque reference.
OYL.
Yeah, there are many references to the pop culture in your work. And here we obviously think of the comic strip Popeye. And there's frequently this intrusion of pop culture. I guess there's also probably a reference to the film in Born Yesterday, the 1950 movie. And it's funny because it seems that your titling process starts very early on. Already when you mix the colors, you just title things with these amazing titles like cappuccino mist or olive oil. And all your titles are amazing. I believe you're the artist with the best titles in the world. And They're just amazing. I would like just to show a few examples. This one, they're all in the exhibition. This one's called Spiritual Etiquette, probably one of my favorites. Picture with Outstanding Form, or Modern Snow, Reasonable Assembly, and oh, this one is probably my favorite, Expressive Abstinence.
Yeah, I think expressive abstinence probably best describes this technique of painting those lines.
Oh.
Because they're very expressive, but they also abstain from full expression. Like when I do those lines, like if you think of Twombly, the way he does graffiti or things like that, it's very present. Actually, there's almost like two time zones in these paintings. There's the scribbles that I draw, and then that get traced out by Kevin and by other assistants before him. And that's like, that's actually in the past, because if you think of the mark being executed, and then it's being covered over with another layer of paint by somebody else's hand, it takes that gesture and it puts it in the past. But when I paint directly into the thick impasto paint, you're seeing the movement of the hand and the mark and the essence of the mark, but it's physical. And because it's in 3 dimensions, it's stepping into our world and it becomes present. I think of the presence as everything that's present at a given moment. I mean, if you walk around Manhattan and you're in Midtown and you see all these dreadful, you know, monstrous super skyscrapers that they're building now. I mean, occasionally 1 or 2 of them are good, but a lot of them are not. And then you walk around and you walk past, like, let's say the New York Public Library. Now that's not such an incredibly old building, but that was built in 1905. And since that time, I'd say maybe like at least 4 generations of people have lived. And the people who were alive at the time of the inception of that building are no longer existing, you know? So that's from 1905, but it's present here now. And so it's contemporary. So I think it's a very interesting thing, particularly in painting, that you can have that kind of duality in time.
And speaking of duality and looking to the past as present, I've noticed that so many artists don't like to look back to their own works. They don't like to show all the works when you visit their studios. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you look back now? Because in this exhibition, there are recent works, but there are also works from the 80s. Do you look at them differently than you did when you actually made them?
Well, I reacquaint myself with them. And I really enjoyed that aspect with this show. And I also reacquaint myself with who I was as a painter at that time. I realized that there were certain things away. I mean, I struggled with more things. I spent more time inventing some of the mark making, like some of the scribbly marks. Like if you talk about the scribble, if you look at Born Yesterday, and you look at the nature of that scribble, it's more random, a little more open. It has a lot more leeway than in more recent paintings. When you look at the scribbles are tighter in the more recent paintings, because I've kind of come to a point where I kind of know that I'm using that as filler of certain geometric forms, which it wasn't in Born Yesterday, but in Born Yesterday, it was more open as to how that got executed. So I can see that, and then I see other things like something like spiritual etiquette, and I look at each and every one of those glyphs in that painting, and I looked at them and I realized that each and every one of them was separate in identity. They weren't used as prototypes for the next one. Whereas in the larger painting, which has glyphs in it, excuse me, I'm forgetting my own title. So the really big one that you said you really love so much.
You mean Lives of Perpetual Wonder?
Lives of Perpetual Wonder. That there's almost an alphabet going on there. you know.
Yeah, it's really like a writing, like the scribble has transformed itself into an alphabet.
Right. So it's just interesting in seeing that. I had to really look at spiritual etiquette. I did it last night. I was trying to reacquaint myself with the painting, and I realized that each one of those forms was alphabet-like or you know, hieroglyphic in manner. But at the same time, each one was separate and
let me look at
neat,
this.
really.
But that's the work, yeah. Really like
that.
a writing. Yeah.
Vertically in rows, you can see that each one, although each one is hand rendered, yet at the same time, each one of them is the same letter, even though they're not letters. You can't really read them.
Yeah, I like how you're using this scribble in its two different meaning, as a writing almost, and also as a pattern, as an image in these little islands of impastos that have their different identity.
Right, exactly.
Going back to these titles of your works, I'm fascinated how sophisticated this reference are to, but you mix pop culture with existential thoughts and a lot of humor. So it kind of gives a lot of narrative to the works. And although it's a more abstract vocabulary, there's something going on. And when I look at your paintings, I always have the feelings that each forms, there's a dialogue and they speak to each other. And I have this feeling they have their own language, as in a cartoon or something, and they speak to each other all the time. There's a lot of speaking going on the surface of the paintings. And I think the titling process also gets into this meaning. And maybe you can tell us more about how you title the works and how the process evolves. And as we saw earlier, you're also starting to title very early on with the giving names to the colors. But how do you title the works?
Well, I actually, as you know, Choghakate, because you've been in my studio, I actually have a title book, but it's not like all of those random thoughts become titles for paintings. But even in my diary that I have, I'll in the margins I write titles when I think of them, and it's just random thoughts, ideas that I have. And I find a kind of a metaphorical way of forming them. It's kind of like my one-line shot at being a poet. As I told Mel, I really am a big fan of poetry. And so when something resonates in my mind, I think that would work. And then I try to apply it to a painting if it seems to somehow or other fit. And that could be a kind of a fit that only I could recognize. But there is a loose way of finding it. But usually when other people try to figure out why I named it that, it leads them in the wrong direction. So to say that they're so spot on in that sense, I can't say.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting because these titles, they have such an expressive power. It's like giving color to the painting in a way, and also they have an almost ornamental quality, but very here. And I'm very interested in what you said about that, this sort of diary of your thoughts. And do you write poetry?
I don't. I admire poets and I love poetry, but I don't like poetry.
Mm-hmm. So speaking about this humor, there's something I would like to talk about, is that something that has challenged me a lot about your work. And I don't think I've come to a conclusion yet. So, because your work is very complex, it's very serious at the same time, very controlled, very thought in advance and while you're doing it. And at the same time, there's this touch of humor that is never a parody or cynicism, but kind of this distance that you have with your work. And I don't know, I've always had trouble with that. What is it serious? Is it genuine, or is it distant? There's always this challenge in your work that's so ambiguous at the same time. And I don't know, there's almost sometimes a nihilistic quality to it, but sometimes I can feel that you're also a believer. It's very ambiguous and challenging. I don't know if there's something
so
you would like to.
What quality did it have?
As if there's more nihilism in it, and at the same time, it's very serious. And I think the closest I've come to qualify what I feel is the late paintings of Picabia. You feel like he kind of doesn't care, but he does care a lot. And there's this very complex ambiguity that I find in your works.
Yeah, well, yeah, I do care, and I do think that the world has a bigger meaning. So yeah, that's definitely the case. I hope I don't give the. I think a lot of people early on, a lot of people thought there was some cynicism in my work, and that the work was kind of a parody.
I would say distance more than cynicism.
What?
It's more about a distance than parody. I would say it's more ambiguous.
Right, right. Well, they're very existential in many of the phrases, and I mean, since existentialism, if you look at the world, it's hard to look at the world except as in a somewhat darker frame. But I think one can transcend that. I believe in that.
Okay. And do you think the sense of humor is something that comes from your education in California?
Oh,
I don't know. I somehow associate this kind of humor with Californian art.
No, it comes from growing up here.
Oh, so it's from here. Okay.
I don't think New Yorkers are as funny nowadays as they used to be, but they used to be pretty funny, you know?
Oh, okay. Because now it's not. Now it's not.
No, it's gotten pretty damn serious, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's very rigid now.
Yes, very rigid. But it used to be pretty funny. And I grew up in, in a Jewish New York background, and they can be pretty humorous people, so.
And speaking of New York, so you arrived in New York in 1979, and you once said
no, I was born in
after. After the training.
I was born in Jersey City, and the first 3 years of my life I lived there. And then, as a very young child, my parents moved to Queens, Flushing Meadow, and then eventually, I personally, I always was coming into Manhattan, so I grew up in New York. And then later, after traveling a fair bit, I came back, and then I lived in Manhattan mostly since 1979, after being in California for my art education. And
you said that when you returned to New York, you said that New York in the 80s, it was the right place at the right time. Why? Can you maybe explain about that?
It was very exciting to come back to New York I came back at the end of the 70s, and then in the 80s, New York really started to flower, and so much was happening, and people were coming in from outside. The New York that I grew up in, while I'd say there was a lot of humor, at the same time, it was also kind of a little harsh in a way, and also I think the people were kind of alienated. There was a lot of alienation amongst the people, and when I came back, there was an influx of a lot of people from outside New York. A lot of Europeans came to New York, and they brought a new energy, and people from other parts of America. But the economy wasn't yet bursting at that point, so it wasn't so much about money, but it was more about art and things like that. And those people brought a kind of an energy that was really very good. And I think it created a buoyant atmosphere. And you see it in that decade. I think the 80s was really, truly a very creative decade. That's my feeling.
And what has changed if you compare New York in the 80s and New York now?
Well, I think people take themselves a little too seriously, and they take a lot of the parameters of politics a little too seriously. That's my feeling.
Okay, and speaking of different cultural cities and countries, now you share your time between New York and Munich in Germany with your wife, the German photographer Barbara Probst. Would you say that when you're in Munich, does it change something to your practice? Do you paint well when you're in Germany? What does it change? Because they're very different cities. So,
yeah, well, over there, I more do the small things because I don't really have a studio there. And so I'm doing the preparatory work. And I live a different life there. But I'm now thinking of becoming a resident there so that I can go back and forth. And unfortunately, what that entails is I have to be away for a certain period of time, each of 3 years, until I can get the permission to come and go as I please. So it might mean half a year there and half a year here. But the way it is right now, the studio, the major studio work is here in New York. Mm-hmm. And, but it's a very creative thing to be there. And many of my ideas come to me there, motifs and ideas for paintings. And it's a very creative time that I have there, actually. And it's very interesting to associate with people over there and see their thoughts and their viewpoints.
Yeah, you have a long history with Germany because you've been showing with the Michael Werner Gallery. I mean, for a long time, you were among the American artists who was shown the most, probably one of those who have shown the most in Europe. What are your thoughts about German art and also what happened in the 80s? When we speak about painting in the 80s, we always compare like American art and German art as if like the biggest scenes. And what are your thoughts about that? These two scenes that you've known and seen and participated in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you asked that question, Choghakate. I mean, Michael Werner is actually, he's a very creative mind. He's an interesting guy. It's a difficult person.
We all know, we've heard so many things.
Have you heard things about that?
Charismatic, as we say.
Charismatic?
An old gentleman.
Well, maybe he's charismatic. Depends what day you catch him on. But, yeah. But he did like Born Yesterday. He loved that band. Yeah, well, I mean, the thing with him was that he was open to taking in, like, basically his group of artists at that time were what was considered to be kind of the core of the neo-expressionists. I mean, they weren't really neo-expressionists, but they sort of were. And if you think of like Boselitz and Lupertz and Pank and those artists, I mean, I really didn't fit in. Not to say that, I mean, I actually, you know, have admiration for some of their work. And, but I wasn't really, it wasn't an easy mesh. But he had enough breadth of understanding of what art can be to know that that was his work at that moment, and to know that I was coming from someplace else, and he was able to see it. Actually, I was introduced to him by David Nolan, who has his own gallery now here in New York. I hope he still has. I don't know which galleries are still open these days. I certainly hope so. And he was working for Michael at that time. And I was like this young artist, 1981. And they did a show in a small gallery in Düsseldorf, run by Gunnar Kaldevai, who published Lieferdartiest, artist books. And he published a book by myself. And he did a show with it. So I had a few paintings there. And then I went around Cologne, and I did what, you know, everybody frowns on, all art dealers frown on. And I brought slides around. And I brought it to Michael's gallery, and David was there, and he looked at it, and he thought, you know, this is not what he's showing, but, you know, I think you would be interested. And so I sat down and we looked at it, and he was. But nothing happened. And then later on, like maybe about two and a half years later, he offered me a show. And then that was the first show that I did there, which opened in January of 1986.
Yeah, it's interesting to see who are the non-German artists he took over, like very specific personalities as Don Van Vliet, who used to be a musician in Captain Beefheart. So it's very exciting to look that into this perspective. Oh, I'm hearing the music. I don't know where it's coming. Oh.
What's that?
Sorry. Okay.
Sorry, we're good now.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay.
I would like to show one more image from the show. It's also one of my favorite paintings. I think it caught my eyes when I visited your studios. This signature is gigantic. It's really amazing. I think the only other artist I can think of would use such huge signature in the middle of his paintings is this French painter, Bernard Buffet, very controversial, exciting painter. And it's amazing how you use your signature as a pattern. And I don't know if it's a decorating motif or is it like sort of self-portrait for you?
Well, I mean, I think it was the idea was to take a painting element and use it as an element within a painting. You know, the signature, the artist's signature is a trope of painting, or actually a necessary element of the finishing of a painting. It's also the declaration of authorship, but because of the nature of this linear activity that I do, which is then executed by somebody else's hands, I thought that this painting particularly was very telling about that. It's like if you look at the overall scribbles in the red, they're fundamentally, you know, because of this whole issue of the assistant's work in a painting, and how genuine it is then, how genuinely a Lasker is it, for example. And so what I thought was, as well as doing the scribbles, and then that gets traced out, of course, I would sign my name. And if the scribbles could be done by anyone, the signature could not, because it's my signature. So I thought that was a very interesting element to put into this particular body of work. Of course, actually, scribbles are very signature by nature. Everybody scribbles differently. Many scribble these big loopy marks, and which are overlaid over each other. And
it's like a handwriting. It's very personal.
It is really like a handwriting, definitely. Mm-hmm.
And it identifies you.
Mm-hmm. Very much so, yeah.
And speaking of authorship and assistance work, is there a way when you can just divide your work between what you do and what your assistant does? Or do you delegate the annoying parts of the painting and keep to yourself the most exciting parts? Is there a generic divide of work or?
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, if you look at this painting, you look at the thick ochre form, and the lines in that's 100% me. I mean,
so you keep to yourself the more erotic part, really the part where there's a lot of pleasure, the sliding into the buttery and creamy paint.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of pleasure in drawing the scribbles. You know, that's very pleasurable and it's very expressive.
A different type of pleasure.
Yeah, it's a little dry.
Yeah. It's like eating cookies or eating buttercream. I mean, different pleasures.
Right, exactly. But yeah, but it's very pleasurable. It's actually extremely pleasurable because it's very relaxing. But then the tracing out of those lines is less so. It's very arduous, and it's definitely hard work. So unfortunately, Kevin has to suffer that.
Okay, so the dry cookies are for Kevin, and the buttercream cake is for you. To sum up the situation.
I don't want to put it that way.
I'm kidding.
Kevin's just about to resign now.
Oh, okay, sorry. Maybe you can give him some creamy parts sometimes, so you know.
We'll see.
I would like just to finish with one last question.
Sure.
Since it's not a retrospective, but there's some quality of looking backwards. And as an artist, do you think about death? And do you think that as an artist, you think about death differently?
As an artist, do I think about death in what, which way?
In different way as an artist.
Oh, no, I really think how you relate to death has a lot more to do with if you think there's a bigger picture, I feel, you know, yeah, I personally do feel that there is, but I could not identify it in any way, it's just a feeling I have, and it sort of shapes how I relate to the world in a way. But you know, I'm probably as afraid of death as the next person, I'm sure.
Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add before we move on to the Q&A?
No, I can't think of anything particularly short. You really came with some good questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, very much for this exciting conversation. Nick, I think there are people waiting to ask questions to Jonathan.
Yes. Well, firstly, I want to thank you both for this wonderful conversation. And there are many things I'll be thinking about well into the weekend. So thank you. And also just another note for everyone in the audience, if you are in New York or nearby, to go and visit Jonathan's show at Greene Naftali, open through the 23rd. But I'm going to hand the mic over to Rail regular, NSE regular, GE Schwartz. GE, you should be able to turn on your mic.
Oh, thank you. I was just actually typing the question, but but here it is. Thank you. And I love your work. I remember seeing it many, many years ago. I think a piece at the Albright Knox Art Gallery, but
could well
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But at any rate, we live in such like a loud world, sonically and visually and every other way, sensually and everything, essentially not always in a positive way. And I'm wondering, do you feel that your sort of heterogeneous elements give us a chance, to enter some acceptance as a way to accommodate that reality?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you were saying as a reality.
Okay, yeah. Do you think the way you put these things together with these sort of heterogeneous elements give us that chance, or at least offered us that chance to enter into kind of an acceptance or a way to accommodate that kind of crazy, loud reality that we live in?
Oh, I'm sorry, but what is the reality?
Well, the loud reality of so much sonic and visual input and data overflow and sensory overflow and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Wow. Right. Well, I particularly am not very participatory in all that mediation or level of media. I'm not on social media, for example, and well, it may be a reaction to a lot of that, in a way, to a lot of the dissonance of our, I mean, my paintings are also dissonant.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're beautiful in many ways, and many people do, but many people find them very dissonant. So they are in a way that, and maybe that's a relationship to something of what you're talking about. But I think it has to be related to, because it is out there and we're living in that.
I often find that kind of dissonance that you're talking about in your work kind of meditative and calming. So thank you for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you very much, GE. I appreciate that.
Thank you as always, GE. I received a question from, apologies, Body Tens. Although I don't think that your microphone is connected, so I'm going to read the question on your behalf, if that's okay. The question is, thank you, and I've admired your paintings for many years. Are there any experiences you had with or around Basquiat in the early 80s you could share with us? Perhaps a studio visit or any other interactions, however banal.
I shook his hand once, so that's all I remember. I met him outside of an opening, and we shook hands, and that was all I remember. I mean, I didn't really have much association with him. In retrospect, I like the work very much now, and but he wasn't somebody I was closely associated with.
Well, thank you. I see we have a question from Tessa. Tessa, I'm gonna hand you the mic now. You should be able to turn on your microphone.
Oh, I was very happy for you to read it as well. But Jonathan, I was just curious, after we made our scarf collaboration, if you had any other textiles or edition projects in the works.
Oh, no, Tessa, unfortunately not. I really enjoyed that project tremendously. But I don't do too many editions. I really, unfortunately, am an underproducer of paintings, which kind of is, I guess, my main job. So it's hard for me to branch out so much. But that was a great project, and I really love it.
Actually, I noticed scarf on some people. I've seen it, and they all adore it. It's just so successful. I mean, they're really wearing it every day.
Oh, really?
This scarf has some fans, I know.
It's good to hear. Yeah, I really should branch out into textiles, I guess.
Maybe.
I like men's ties. You know, the design of patterns on men's ties I find fascinating.
I also want to ask another. Thank you, thank you, Tessa, for that question. Lynn Crawford in the audience has a question that she also asked me to read on her behalf. But Lynn says, Jonathan, I came across your work years or perhaps decades ago in the journal Laconian Ink. I remember you said something about being faithful to and skeptical of structure. That fascinated me. Could you speak about that? Or I'm sorry, I may have misread that. That might be Iaconian ink. Or maybe this is a series of autocorrects. Laconian ink?
Laconian ink. Yeah, that was a journal back in the, I believe in the 90s, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe it's still around. I'm not really sure. I'm both fascinated by and skeptical of structure.
It was what Lynn had shared was that she remembered you said something about being faithful to and skeptical of structure.
I'm drawing a blank on this one. It's one of these things where I get paraphrased, and I probably meant something at the time, and I can't really recall it. So, and it doesn't necessarily align with maybe the way I look at things. So it's a little hard for me to retrace my steps intellectually back there. But
fair enough. Fair enough.
Often, sometimes I am quoted, and it's totally reasonable. And but I maybe it was something I would have said at a certain time, and it's hard for me to connect to it now. That's really maybe all within me. It's internal.
If I may, I have a question myself that referring back to the Rail interview that you did with Fong in 2016, sort of in talking about your influences, you talked about two professors that were a large influence on you, Richard Archwager and Susan Rothenberg. And I think that there are a lot of kind of immediate some artists that kind of come to mind that visually sort of could be kind of grouped in with or look similar to your work. But in that same interview, there was an interesting connection that you both brought up of Thomas Gainsborough by way of a text that Tony Godfrey wrote. And this led me to just kind of wonder, and this is my question, if there are other artists sort of from the canon or alive now that are like a kind of an unexpected influence that one wouldn't really know about, or those that have had an influence on you?
Well, and maybe not so much influences as enthusiasms. I mean, Archwager was definitely an influence. His thinking very much influenced me. He was a very he was a very abstract thinker. He was a little hard to follow. I think a lot of the other students at Cal Arts, he taught me at Cal Arts, had trouble following him. But if you had the patience, he was really quite informative. And then Susan Rothenberg was also very good because she was very encouraging, and she supported me at a very critical moment in my early formation. I was at the end of my studies at Cal Arts. I studied 1 year there, to tell you the truth. The big joke about me at Cal Arts is that I went there to become a painter. So if you can imagine that, this arch conceptual academy. She also, of course, was a painter. She came there and she was teaching there. And she wasn't that much older than me. She was 3 years older than me. And she was very, very successful artist early in her 30s. And she saw the first two paintings in this body of work. The first one was sort of Illinois, and she read a lot into that, and she was very encouraging. And so that was a very critical moment to get that kind of support. And actually recently I've done a book of paintings that were of that time. And it's called The White Form Paintings, and it was published in Germany by Jochen Kienbaum, who is an art collector in Germany. And he publishes artist books once a year. And last year that I was that artist. And I dedicated that book to her as a thank you.
Well, thank you. I have one more question from a follow-up from G.E. Schwartz, and it's a quite straightforward one of poetry. Which poets do you read?
Well, I'm not as contemporary as I would like to be. Probably my all-time favorite is W.H. Auden. I think he's one of the great rhetorical poets of all time. His poem, September 1st, 1939, still, stays with me. It's a sensational piece of work. And just so many, I mean, they don't come to mind when you need to bring them up in an interview, but I'm a big poetry fan. I love reading poetry. Right now, I'm reading something by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who I also love, and Ginsberg, of course, is a great poet. Just many, too many to enumerate.
Well, thank you. I think we all have a universal love for Auden. I'm going to hand the mic back to you, Choghakate.
Thank you, Nick.
In lieu of, usually we have Fong asking the final question of the day, but unfortunately he's in another meeting and sends his best, but I'm going to send it over to you, Choghakate.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for opening the discussion to other artists, because I wanted to ask you, Jonathan, something about other artists. Because you wrote about different artists in your writings, in your theoretical writings. Mm-hmm. And we had this discussion about the French painter Eugène Leroy, who is very underrated artist, although he's having a comeback. And you knew him through Michael Werner Gallery, was one of the first one to represent him. Sorry?
I own 2 paintings by Leroy.
Oh, wow.
The one I traded with Werner for. And the other one I traded a fellow artist for.
Oh, wow. I believe he's one of the greatest French artists of the second half of the 20th century.
Wonderful artist, truly, yeah.
And yes, it's interesting to see you look at such a reclusive, romantic, creamy artist. I don't know, I'll put in the chat his name so everyone can look at the thickness of his paints, and each museum has stories about his works. And you spoke of his work as a lava-like paint flow, which is very interesting because he would just layer paint and paint over old paint. So it kind of, every time you move one of his paintings, you just lose some tiny bits of painting, and there's a lot that hasn't dried.
Does it happen a lot? Is there damage that happens?
I think ever that each museum has a little envelope with tiny bits of paintings that just drops, and it still smells and it's very heavy. And another artist that is different, but kind of have some romanticism in him and that you knew is Thomas Noskovsky.
Right. Yeah.
Is there something you would like to say about him? I think at the Rail, we're all huge fans of him.
No, he was a great painter, and I really sorely miss him. I'm really sorry about his demise a couple of years ago. Is it 2 years ago now or not?
I think it's 19.
It's recent. It's pretty recent. I think it was before the beginning of the whole Corona situation. Yeah, no, he's a wonderful painter, and I visited him in the studio many times, and upstate in New York, and yeah, it's just, I have great admiration for him. And I met him early on. I was when I returned to New York in 1979. He was one of the first serious painters that I met. I was going around the galleries and in Soho, and I went to 55 Mercer Gallery, which was sort of a co-op gallery, and it was sort of artist run, as it were. And I saw this show of these paintings, fundamentally abstract paintings, and I was really very taken by them. And I went to the guy sitting at the desk, and I said, it's a great show. He said, thank you. I painted it. So that was the show. And that's how I met Tom, and then we became good friends after that.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah,
you're very welcome, Choghakate.
Well, I want to thank you both once again for this wonderful conversation. And speaking of our universal love of poetry, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And I'm very thrilled to welcome our poet laureates of the day, Jessica Grim and Melanie Neilson, to the stage. A quick introduction for them both. Poet Jessica Grim is the author of several books of poetry, including Vexed, Fray, Locale, and The Inveterate Life. Poet Melanie Neilson's books include Civil Noir, Natural Facts, and several chapbooks. But from 1989 to 2000, Jessica and Melanie co-founded/edited Big Alice, a magazine focusing on experimental writing by women. So Melanie and Jessica, welcome to the stage.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Should I go louder?
I think loud enough. You're clear.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you, Anselm, Malvika, Nick, and the entire Brooklyn team for inviting Jessica and I to participate in this event. Thank you, Choghakate, and thank you, Jonathan, for that very inspiring, provocative presentation. Jessica and I will now be co-reading a few pages from the long collaborative work we completed in 2020, titled The Autobiography of Jean Foos. The selection is from the excerpt published in the current issue of the Rail. And this is our debut reading from the manuscript. Thank you.
Everyone. What we're reading is from part 2 of the autobiography of Jean Foos, and the title for the part is Pages Must Show. Startled anon thrush argyle metafractal pilferings, images for schist. No, my mother was not in prison, just the world. Seeping cold stone beeswax, Lord, the load was fearsome light. The singer sounded like she had just returned from night. Measuring pumice fragment chucked by posited volcano, trailer park, Tepic. She herself was a mythological creature, no realm for geographers. On the straight open desert road, drive test mangles teen ego.
Today's temp, drop. Somewhere, tiny feather bundles, sit tight, biotexture. Perpetual, of currents, arching under the door. Country road redux, almost always reading through keyhole, sees, tree of book, as if seizing an act itself, repeated to equal memory. One gal calls another, and the opening sound of seagulls, layering narrative sounds, desolate or confused or bad sibling syndrome, roll out the sky as if it hopes a scroll.
Geographical inscription born as fog, bright happiness phobic barometer. Whence, not whence, joy to begin, domestic and obscure clip-clop. Sensible librarian stilts don't get me anywhere near the ceiling. A woman sits wrong in a room writing. Nothing happens. Black-bound spines pneumatically hushing echoes off tiles, swinging gates. Benign asterisk, signal of a treasure which is not analog. Soft-souled and equidistant, dreams trip subterranean stacks, motes flying.
Outskirts of sun encyclopedia, dots sprinkle across infant's face. Quiet of a summer day is the cool of wooden floors. Don't know if prepare narrative is a garden exit strategy. I am in no position to construct my own story. Technicolor, iris, aura in lieu of an ordinary elevation. Consigned to the daylight, wishes fall in a dead heat. Stars and stripes house streaming war. Texture hit her news.
Glow-in-the-dark saint watches over the acreage. Heard the word face-to-face, acetate, no boundary line. Predicated on loss, explorations lean toward the middle, pure light. Out and about, revived fragments live out our precise experimentation. Time-lapse funicular, follies adapt to reason of semi-sheer century. Truck through disasters of peace in good heart, rote trip. Calamity normalizing dense inches of dust, then surrounding them.
Only thing to do, unfold words in the continuity queue. Behaving as instructed, except damned tilt toward norm bunching up. Passing back and forth, flat tire with popcorn, panoramic movie candy. The scene floats above their brows by about 50 yards. Pop goes library space, imagination shelves, 1,000 books of Occupy. Connected at the spine, the forever train leaving the station. Diverse tales clash, intermission. Past, present, imaginary space, childish eye.
A plum nation, me upon the land, they upon the land. Misspelled psychology familiars too rich and strange for synopsis. Notary dust in which the hot wind spelled desert mouth. Pseudonyms at night, glittering I and I, day to day. Addictive nods to roadshow, step personhood, outback Iowa way. Now elevators dialogue in sword subtitles to the street. Mid-range grain pebbling path to the stars, oh Lord.
In a neighboring office, a power-driven machine vibrated dully. Steadfast Midwest rumble, a clarity achieved for sons of ours. Still see Big Alice, the power plant's billowy thought pillows. Pre-offspring canopy floats indigo, an avenue turned too bright, all more present arriving. I step off the metaphysical plane. Head full of others' heads, a spill I can't contain. Existence of reader, this is happening. Real electrical lighting.
A seizure of disappointment put the man to sleep. Warlike age imprint, the days themselves, wisps, psychological library thriller. Bright finish of the plains as in render them tractable. Smiting sun face against a city, other pines, cool channels. Respite proxy, tiered labor antigen, shallow pools of calm sparkle. New and neglected long takes just existing unravel next door, while forward tilt deposits fractious fall from both coasts gently.
Facing something new through distorted prisms peculiar to their age, which is to say, the first wind upset the apex. I would have circled back if the shadows weren't so voluptuous. Ephemeral road, torches, steps, so inward is the path. With help, we can together uncover new things about you. When my idiom parka bellowing took a turn against me, meanwhile, cheese, sauce, packet, mixed well via Queen's kilowatts. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Snaps and claps. Thank you so much, Jessica and Melanie. That was a wonderful way to conclude today's conversation. I want to thank you again, Jonathan and Choghakate, for this wonderful conversation. I'd also like to thank Taylor Walsh at Greene Naftali Gallery for being a big help in organizing this event, and the extended gallery team as well. We are here every day at 1 p.m. with some occasions where we join at 3 p.m. But join us on Monday at 1 for a conversation between artist Leonardo Drew and Rail Editor-at-Large Eleanor Hartney. We will conclude with a poetry reading from Charles Theonia. So I want to thank you all for spending your Friday with us, and you can all now turn on your mics to say hello and goodbye and bon weekend.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for joining. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And have a great weekend.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.